Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hello, Mikkipedians. That's what I've decided to call you because you're listening to Mikkipedia. And this is Mikki. And this week on the podcast, I speak to fan favourite Dr. Cliff Harvey. And we talk about a host of things, as I'm sure you would already have guessed, given how often Cliff has been on the show and how diverse our conversations can get. However, the purpose of this particular show is to talk about female athlete nutrition, female nutrition in general, and that there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and nuance matters. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Cliff Harvey, PhD, is New Zealand's expert on the effects of a ketogenic diet in a healthy population. But he is so much more than that. He has been helping people to live healthier, happier lives and to perform better since starting in clinical practice in the late 1990s. Over this time, he has been privileged to work with many Olympic, professional, Commonwealth and other high-performing athletes. He has also worked with many people to overcome the effects of chronic and debilitating health conditions. Along the way, he's founded or co-founded many successful businesses in the health, fitness and wellness space, including the Nutrition Store Online, which is now TheraStore, and Holistic Performance Institute, New Zealand's leading certification and diploma for health, nutrition, health coaching and performance that has many of the world experts teaching on the course, so students are learning from the best. Cliff has over 20 years experience as a strength and nutrition coach, and in addition to his PhD research, he is a registered clinical nutritionist, qualified naturopath, and holds a diploma in fitness training and health coaching and patient care. So you can find Cliff over at cliffharvey.com and also over at holisticperformanceinstitute.com. Before we crack on into it, I would just like to remind you that the best way for you to support this podcast is to hit subscribe or like on your favourite podcast platform. And if there's space, leave a 5-star review. That would be amazing, and more people will have access to the information that my expert guests share with you and with me on Mikkipedia. All right, team, please enjoy the conversation that I have with Dr. Cliff Harvey.
We say words and they have the wrong meaning, but we still get it. Like when people say, I made a concerted effort, that's not really correct, because to have a concerted effort involves more than one person.
Does it?
Because you have to be working in concert, Or another cool one is to peruse something. You kind of think, I'll quickly look over it. But peruse actually means an in-depth reading of something.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know that I've ever thought about that, actually. Like we were talking about the accent. I don't know if I've ever actually given that much thought before.
These are the things that keep me up at night, Mikki.
It's because you're such a scholar, Dr. Cliff Harvey.
I just like to be correct, you know?
Yeah.
I don't like things being wrong. Which is a very limiting way to think, because there's no truth, is there, out there?
Well, the truth is out there.
I'm going to start
the truth
going,
is out there.
Well, apparently, yeah. Having, on that note, David Duchovny is a very good writer.
Okay, yes.
I've read now, I think, 4 of his novels.
Have you?
They're really good.
He was here last month for the Auckland Writers' Festival, did you know?
Yeah, I stayed at my place.
Bull. Actually, that could have... Did you see? I actually thought that could have been correct. I mean, you have contacts, but...
it's possible, yeah.
Yeah. However, hilariously, they advertised him being here in Auckland, and I looked at the paper, and the picture of him was the picture of him back in the 90s when I was in love with him as Mulder from The X-Files. And I thought, hang on, that's a little bit of false advertising. I'm sure he's aged in the last however many years, that is 30 years.
Yeah, but aged well.
And clearly has developed some good writing skills, or he's always had them.
I think he might have been a literature grad, and then went into acting.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure, but I think that might be the case. Yeah. Anyway, that's not really germane to anything, but it's
interesting nonetheless.
It's interesting.
Okay, so that's good. So you would recommend actually his books to as something that I might enjoy.
Yeah, his first one was called Miss Subways, I think, and it's like a Gaiman-esque. So sort of it seemed quite iterative of Neil Gaiman, but it was a very good read. And then he's written one recently called The Reservoir, which I'm reading now, which is really good.
Yeah. When do you read,
anyway.
Cliff?
I read every night.
Yeah.
So, but when we get into bed, I read and read basically until I fall asleep. So I'm not reading as much as I was pre-Dexter in the PD days, but I tend to still read about a novel a week.
Nice.
And it's just my distraction time, because so much of what I do during the day is pretty dry, reading through, like yourself, reading through papers and stuff like that. For me, reading novels is just a complete escape.
Do you know, people, you might be the same when you talk to people. So people often, when I ask them how they spend sort of part of their time, and they almost apologize for watching TV at night. And I'm like, but that is how you unwind and relax. So I wouldn't apologize for that, because similarly, I read every night and I feel a bit ripped off when I don't get the opportunity. But what I've found is, because I do the dry reading and a lot of, like most people, my mind is occupied by work-related stuff. And by the time it comes around to like 9 o'clock, I have tried reading novels that have been recommended in the paper or a New York Times, sort of real thinking man's sort of novel. And I can't. I always go back to my travel romance novels, but really light stuff which is embarrassing to read. And I basically read the same novel again and again and again, but the characters change, the place they change, but it's exactly the same, totally the same.
Yeah. Well, I guess at the end of the day, most novels are somewhat similar thematically. They all have, similar narrative arcs, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I read all sorts of stuff. I read everything from fantasy through to sci-fi through to, historical novels. I recently reread The Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh.
Such a good book. And you learn so much from novels. Through that novel, I've learned not a lot, but at least a little bit about the French judicial system and, little things like that you pick up. So,
yeah. I think all I'm learning about is the landscape of France and Italy and different places within that, and the food culture, actually. That's basically, and that they tend to like to drink a glass of rosé at lunch and dinner, and not just dinner. And it seems to be a daily thing.
I got very much into that habit when I briefly lived in Argentina.
Did you?
Yeah, so I would I'd go to Spanish school in the morning, and then on the way home I'd go through the market, pick up some meat, veggies, whatever, just something light, meat and bread, usually meat, bread and cheese kind of thing, from the local market for lunch, a nice little bottle of wine. So I'd have a glass of wine and some cold cuts and bread, whatever, all sort of fresh stuff. Then I'd have a siesta, wake up, go to the cafe, have a coffee, and then go to the gym, and then sort of repeat at night. It was awesome. It was great lifestyle.
Sounds great, actually. Oh,
I don't know why I left, actually.
Yeah, I know. Because you had bigger things to achieve and do and to offer the world, Cliff, than just your money at the market for the glass of wine.
Possibly, maybe. The story is yet to be completely written.
However, Holistic Performance Institute, how's that going?
Great. I mean, I think that everyone I speak to in education or, in any business really, they're noticing that there's a bit of a crunch on at the moment, because inflation rising cost of living, all that kind of stuff. But at least I think in the field we're in, people, I hope, I think I see this and I hope that it carries on, that people are becoming a little bit more focused on health, and even more than health, like health and happiness. And what's going to drive that on a day-to-day level, because obviously there is a lot of uncertainty, and I think people are becoming a little bit disillusioned with just, being on the treadmill and doing the standard 9 to 5 and really just having a work for work's sake kind of mentality. I think people are really stepping outside of that, wanting to do that for themselves, but also, getting involved with their own health and happiness process, and then wanting to help other people to do that as well. So, I think that's a really cool movement that might have come out of all this shambles of the last few years.
Who's the cohort of Holistic Performance Institute? Like, who does your courses? Because a lot of people come and ask me, like, they're wanting to refresh their nutrition, or they want to get some understanding or grounding, or they want a completely different, like you say, like switching up of their sort of career and stuff like that. So, but these are people across the board. Is that your student as well?
Yeah, it is. If we had to split it up, we would probably have a demographic that is a bit biased towards, say, the 25 to 45-year-old woman. That sort of, we call it, in business, we used to call it LOHAS, the lifestyles of health and sustainability. So it's sort of people who are interested in health and interested in sustainability and those types of aspects. So we get a lot of crossover with personal trainers. People are interested in yoga, existing naturopaths or other health practitioners who want to upskill in either health coaching or nutrition. A lot of our personal trainers want to obviously upskill in sports nutrition and be able to provide more in that space. And I guess with the different courses we now offer, whether it be between health coaching focused courses, sports nutrition, or clinical nutrition, we're starting to get a wider spread as well. Because, personal training is fairly evenly split between men and women. Health coaching is still probably dominated by women more than men. And nutrition is, an interesting one, because a lot of the biggest, the most bombastic voices out there are often men. But by and large, most practitioners in nutrition are women.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And, we're here talking about today, like our main topic of conversation will, of course, be around the female nutrition space and the courses that HPI are running, of which I have been involved in sort of developing. But actually, my first question, which is a slight tangent to that and nothing at all to do with what we were originally discussing, anti-diet culture. So I was on a podcast with Julianne Taylor yesterday, and I can't wait to release that, because you and I both know Julianne. She's amazing, and she's very not only like gifted in terms of what she's able to do now with her sport, but as a nutritionist, as a sort of scholar, she's very smart.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation about the anti-diet culture, and I was wondering if you have any thoughts on it and its place in this whole health space, I guess.
Oh, geez, where do we start and finish? I mean, I've got thoughts on that out the wazoo.
Oh, share them, please.
I think the anti-diet culture or anti-diet movement is, on balance, a positive one. Mm-hmm. Because, for so long, so much of our media presentation was based around the way people look. And, even our medical system was to a large degree, I guess, tempered by weight being such a massive focus. And that led obviously to people feeling victimized and, shameful about the way they were. And so that played into the whole diet culture of yo-yo dieting and extreme low calorie diets and, all those things that we saw growing up in the 80s, you and I, which is probably the worst decade for it. And, the movement against that, I think, is really important, because it starts to put the focus back on where it should be, which is, I believe health and happiness, with happiness being the most important thing. And so if we start to remove the overarching elements of diet culture from what we're trying to achieve, I think we can just be far more effective in it, because then it goes from, you will see this in clinic, right? So often people will come to us and they feel that by achieving a certain body shape, they'll be happy, but we know that's not the case. Like the pursuit of happiness should be the key thing. And then within that, we recognize that being healthy is a critical foundation for happiness. And people will seek to achieve that supposed ideal of body shape by smashing themselves with endless cardio and starving themselves with ridiculous low-calorie diets, none of which they'll be able to stick to. And so then we just get this horrible situation where people are feeling, they're feeling shameful, they're feeling like they're victimized, and they're continually just beating themselves up, getting no sort of return. So that's why I say, on balance, I think it's a really positive thing. However, I think it can go too far, where the whole idea of being on a little d diet as compared to like a big D diet culture war is always a negative. So if you mention like a low carb diet or a keto diet, anti-diet people might start attacking you and say, why are you recommending diets? It's like, well, I'm not recommending diets. What I'm saying is that there are structures that help people to achieve results. And I think the idea that we can have absolute freedom is such a pervasive myth that we have in the world nowadays in so many areas, but in diet is one of them, right? Well, I'm just going to have complete freedom in what I do. Well, that's cool. That's your choice. And I hope that makes you happy. But the evidence we have shows that when people do that, while they might feel better in a psychosocial sense for the short to medium term, their long-term health outcomes continue to decline, right?
Yeah.
So there needs to be some pragmatism. I think any of us who have, health conditions, or who have health goals, or want to be, even just really productive or passionate or purposeful, whatever it happens to be, we recognize that there needs to be some structure, and we need freedom within that as well. And I don't think there's a problem with that. So I think we just need to be pragmatic. And one other thing that I see a lot, and I know I'm rambling here, is that in that world, which is supposed to free people from being victimized or shamed or bullied, there's a lot of bullying.
I agree.
Right? If I write a scientific article, a peer-reviewed journal article in which I mention obesity, which is a medical condition, and then I start getting people attacking me through DMs about using the word obesity because it's triggering, and being ad hominem and calling me all sorts of names and stuff, that's part of the problem. That's not part of the solution.
Yeah. No, and you weren't rambling, by the way. And your thoughts are exactly sort of what Julianne and I also spoke of. And she had such a good point as well, is that whilst the intention is good, because ultimately we want people to live their best life and obviously be happy and be thriving within that, it's really difficult to have the premise of anti-diet and eat whatever you like in an environment that is set up to eat whatever you like, whenever you like, wherever you like, foods that just trigger that feedback reward system in the brain that make you want to keep eating, and I think point. I thought so too, and that's certainly not mine, that was Julianne's, and I'm like, yes, actually, that's something which I completely didn't really sort of consider.
And you guys will have an interesting take on that too, because you're both athletes, right? Yes. And so and not even talking about the fueling side of things, or that is obviously an important part of it, but you will understand, because of your athletic exploits, the necessity of actually doing certain things to achieve a greater benefit. Because if you're an athlete, like I used to be a weightlifter, I'm a grappler, all that kind of stuff. If I just said, you know what, I'm just going to go completely intuitively, whatever that means, because I think that's a really fraught term as well, and I'll do what I feel like in the moment, there would be no consistency and structure that would have allowed me to, achieve championships or records or whatever. Because I just go into the gym, and I probably wouldn't actually go into the gym. I'd say, oh, you know what, I'm going to miss it today. And then in terms of fueling, it's like, oh, you know what, I have a tendency to just not eat, right? So I could go through the whole day without eating, and then at night, obviously the driver physiologically is going to be get sugar, get calories, get fat, get it all in one parcel. I'm probably just going to go out and buy, a couple of liters of milk and a dozen donuts. If I did that every day, I'd be, not in a good way. So I think, we need to obviously recognize that we can't function with this sort of vague notion of intuition, as you say, within an environment that is just replete with hyper palatable, ultra refined foods and massive food availability all the time.
And it's interesting because some people who I follow who are now in that anti-diet space are previous authors of diet books, and they've had a switch in how they feel about it. Yet, of course, I can't help but be somewhat skeptical because they switched to a keto plan for 6 months to write a keto book, and now they're in the anti-diet space, and they're about to write an anti-diet book. And these are. And then prior to that, it was a sort of paleo book and then a sugar book, and it's all selling stuff, I suppose. And I think part of my skepticism around this particular person is that it is all actually selling stuff, and she's exactly doing the same thing, yet criticizing others for doing the same. So it's a little bit like what you were saying with your bullying or your example there. Like, it's not actually different, it's just the context and the subject matter is different.
Oh, exactly. And there's no one more zealous or expert than a recent convert, right?
Oh, yeah.
We see it with, people who switch to keto and suddenly it's all keto all the time and everyone should be on it. And usually most people with a bit of experience doing something will recognize that that's not the case. Most people do, I think, develop a bit of pragmatism over time, although some will obviously become more and more extreme. But yeah, I mean, there's no one way to do things. And I think the key thing is you got to step away from all that labeling of, diet culture versus anti-diet, all those, various terms, and just think about what is going to help people in the least judgmental way to achieve health and happiness and help them live a life that is more passionate and purposeful. Because all the rest is just bullshit. None of the rest matters. And I think there are some people out there, I would obviously at this instance mention Michelle Yandel as someone who is very pragmatic in that space and recognizes that, it's not more about empowered eating and taking back that power and recognizing that there's no good or bad foods per se. It's all about, balance over the long term and all those types of things. Utilizing a lot of the concepts that have come from, say, Haze or intuitive eating, anti-diet culture, but putting it in a framework that recognizes that, you still need to actually do certain things for health.
Yeah, no, I like that. And there's also Michelle Martangi.
Same.
Yeah, I would absolutely put her in that space as well. And just the idea that, or the need for focusing on work that might not necessarily be following a diet, but it's actually what do you need to do to make yourself feel differently or change the narrative or make whatever you do a positive experience rather than this continual punishment. And I think that this is where the anti-diet sort of culture sort of comes from, is the idea that people have been punishing themselves with diet. And I absolutely agree. There are so many people who do things based in sort of deprivation because of that, sort of self-punishment story.
We've probably all done it. And, although we think about it, we often frame it as a female issue. And I think there are differences. I'm not going to say there's not. But, people like Eric Helms and I have talked about this before in seminars and all sorts, is that we both consider that we probably had not eating disorders, but we were certainly disordered eating through a large part of our competitive careers because we were practically starving ourselves to remain ripped. And it wasn't healthy because we were feeling, stressed and anxious and not sleeping well and, all these effects. And it does come from a lot of the same impetus, I guess. Now, I think one of the benefits of being a dude in this respect, and this is part of that male privilege, is that we're not so victimized or shamed by it. Because it's more acceptable for a guy to become, a little bit heavier and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But also what that leads to, I think, is some degree of pragmatism maybe it's not pragmatism, but there's just because there is less of that victimization, I think there can be a little bit more of just letting it go. And that's why I don't think there is ever there's no one particular right way to do things. And when I'm talking about this, I often use the example of I tend to stay away from the word cheat, because I think that when we use the terming the framing cheat, a lot of people will then, that becomes an off-on switch. I've cheated on my diet, therefore it's broken, or I've done something bad. It becomes a negative and sort of self-victimizing cycle. However, a student of mine several years ago, when I was mentioning the importance of framing, said, well, in my case, that's completely not the case. I loved the word cheat, and it was because she came from a tech and gaming background in which a cheat is something that helps you to get a greater benefit, right? So
it's like a hack.
Exactly, and it's synonymous with that. So she loved the word cheat because for her it had positive connotations. And I think we need to remember that, because sometimes, like I might look at myself occasionally in the mirror and say, I'm getting a bit fat. And that can be really triggering for some people, because for them to approach it that way would be really negative. But for me, it's just a call to action. It's like, you know what, I'm getting a bit fat. I better tighten up just a little bit, not because I'm worried so much about the way I look, but I know that if I start to put on body fat, adipokine-driven inflammation, that worsens my mental health. That might trigger some bipolar stuff, and it might worsen my autoimmune conditions.
Yeah.
So I just know that it's a physical expression of poorer health for me, and I'm only talking about my experience here, that will not help my health and happiness in the medium to long term. So it's just like a call to action. Okay, I'm going to get back on track. But I'm quite comfortable using those terms, whereas I know that for a lot of people that would be super triggering. But it's a good example that there's no right, wrong. It's not always black and white. There's not one thing that is the correct way for everybody.
No, I appreciate that, Cliff. And I am going to ask you a little bit about that in a minute. But what I found when I gained 12 kilos in 2016, so a significant amount of weight for someone of my size, it was to the detriment of my mental health. So I can sort of appreciate what, there has to be a balance between that physical health and also your mental health, and finding that balance is, I think, important and it's important to think about those things as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you tighten up your diet, actually? People often want to hear it from the experts, what they do. They probably know what you might recommend people do, but what do you do yourself to help sort of tighten things up?
That's a really good question, because I think for me it's mostly around consistency. And although I often, in the first instance, will try and teach people about food quality and, eating meals rather than snacks, eating until they're full, things like that. Eating really good quality food, those types of things that help people to auto-regulate. For me, that's part of it, but the biggest part is, as like a linchpin action, is to be consistent with my eating, because I tend to not eat enough. And then when I don't eat for a long period of time, I'm much more likely to choose foods that, if I choose them too often, are not going to be good for me. So for me, it's really about making sure that I have, a protein shake with fish oil and greens in the morning, making sure I have, a lot of protein and veggies at lunch, and then the same at dinner. And if I'm really focusing on, even if it's just those three things, I know that the rest is going to fall into line pretty well. But if, for example, I miss that shake in the morning and just load up on coffee, then I probably won't have lunch. And then at nighttime, I'll have a good dinner, but afterwards I'll probably be craving more, because my body, just simply hasn't had enough calories. And what I tend to go for then is, sweeter stuff, cookies and Snickers bars and that kind of stuff, which I would tend to only have usually on one, maybe 2 nights of a week as treats, right? And it's within the constraints of a structure that works really well for me. But if I allow that then to bleed out because my consistency hasn't been better, then that's when things start to go south and I start to feel pretty crappy.
Yeah. And do you find it hard being consistent? Or actually, so how often might that happen now for you compared to, say, 10 years ago or whatever?
It usually happens for a period of weeks, maybe once every 6 to 12 months, and I'll recognize that I'm starting to feel worse. My joints are sore. I'm having more, mood ups and downs rather than being a little bit more consistent. I might find that my gastrointestinal stuff is worsening, obviously because of the Crohn's disease. And so I just noticed those triggers starting to come up, which in some respects is probably lucky, right? For a lot of people, if they didn't have that and they just progressively started feeling worse and worse day by day, they wouldn't necessarily realize it. And that's one of the things, we often don't realize how poor we feel because it's been a slow progression. And so sometimes we need to take these health condition triggers as almost being a blessing because they're telling us, sort your shit out.
Yeah, literally. It's interesting that what you say about having the triggers to sort of it takes some time to notice that you're not feeling so good. And do you know what I find with women? And this is on the energy front, for example, which might be quite a good segue into talking about the female athlete on just the female nutrition course, is that clinically speaking, when I ask a woman how she's feeling in terms of energy, it's really difficult for her for a lot of women to recognize when the energy is poor, because actually they just have to get on and do stuff. So be it work, train, look after a household, raise a toddler, take the kids everywhere. Like, it's almost like they haven't really thought about their energy because they don't have the luxury of thinking about their energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And also our energy is a flux around a point, right? So we have a baseline and then we either feel poorer or better based on that sort of baseline, but often people's baseline is lower than what it could be. And so I haven't done this for a long time, but I used to in clinic, I used to often just ask people on a scale of sort of 1 to 10, just overall, how do you feel, like snapshot? And I'd sort of snap my fingers and get them to just give me a real instinctive answer. And usually people would say, because obviously they're coming in to see me for a reason, they would usually be lower than what they wanted, but they'd often say something like, oh, I'm about a 6, and I really want to be like a 9 or a 10. But then what would often happen is a month or two later when they came back in, I'd say, well, how do you feel now? And they say, oh, you know what? I'm probably about a 7 or an 8. But I realized before I wasn't a 6, I was like a 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Because they just didn't realize how different they could feel. But once they start to progress, they realize that what they previously thought might have been a 9 or a 10 is actually a massive improvement, but it's still not where they could be because they still know that they could improve even more.
Yeah.
I see this with everyone, but I certainly see it a lot with women. I think a lot of the reason for that is either under fueling or in the presence of over fueling under nutrition.
Yes.
And I think just due to the nature of the types of restrictions that women are more likely to put themselves through as compared to men, perhaps we see that a little bit more.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned the in both of those aspects, because I think that the overfueling under nutrition can occur for athletes who are focusing on the wrong foods to sort of fuel their sessions and their day, because they're needing to replenish their muscle carbohydrate stores, and they know that they need to have X number of grams of carbohydrate in order to do that. So I think that's one aspect. But I also think another aspect of that overnutrition, under fueling, is they go in not fueling well, so under eating, but then more than making up for it at the end of the day. And I think that's where a lot of that overfueling and undernutrition sort of comes from as well. And that's, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I've been really conflicted about so much of the blowback against the CrossFit nutrition statement they put out, which basically said to avoid added sugars.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the nutrition space have come out and said, that's ridiculous. You can't completely avoid them and all this kind of stuff. And I agree with that to some degree, but by the same token, I think anyone should probably be striving to eat mostly unrefined foods, natural unrefined foods where possible, just because they're more likely to be nutrient replete if they do that. Sure, if on top of that they have a little bit of treat food, I don't care, because I've done that in the past. When I was boxing, I would make sure I ate all my meals, but at the end of the day, I'd often be so hungry, I'd have some Snickers bars and milk, whatever, because I needed the extra calories, but I knew at least I was nutrient replete. I think the point you're making, which I agree with 100%, is that if you're not nutrient replete across the board, and then you're making up for those additional calories with a lot of ultra-refined, hyper-palatable food that is low in relative, micronutrient density, that could potentially be an issue. And I've seen that a lot in my recent work, particularly around long COVID vaccination adverse events, autoimmune conditions. Basically, everyone that I see, whether or not they're eating a healthy diet, and most of them actually are eating an ostensibly healthy diet, they're not getting enough of all of the essential micronutrients from their diet. And in some cases, like the recent case study I just published, you look across the board, the things that these people weren't getting, it just blows your mind. They're not getting enough magnesium, zinc, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, iron, B1, 3, 5, 6, 12, enough protein, enough omega-3 fats. It's so across the board. But if you just eyeballed their diet, you'd say, oh, it looks pretty healthy.
Yeah.
But once you start to analyze it, you realize that, hey, these people are undernourished, and so many people are. And it fits with the research we have now, right? From a range of conditions, but also with respect to COVID, that undernourishment and malnutrition are massive cofactors.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, because similar to you, I didn't publish a case study or anything like that. So different to you, but I was looking at research in and around that sort of micronutrient and relationship between severity of outcomes, the potential for long COVID and things like that. And whilst I know I'll park long COVID because as I understand it, there are different types of long COVID, it manifests differently, but within that sort of severity of illness, it does appear that some really basic nutrients are related. So, and I'm sure that you would have written about, vitamin D or selenium or omega-3s is one which can really help.
And protein.
And protein, totally. Which is one which we know is across the board for most people, for whatever reason, a difficult nutrient to be sufficient in.
And would you say in your experience, would that be more prevalent in women?
100%.
Yeah.
Actually.
I'd agree.
And I would say that men do struggle or don't think about it as much, but men eat more food. And when you eat more food, your ability to get more nutrients by default is probably increased, almost like you don't think about protein, but because you eat such a variety of food, you're going to get it anyway. Whereas women they're low protein eaters. They're low eaters in the morning. And this is particularly, I see this in a lot of my female athletes as well, and more so probably. And then they're mindful of portions of food in and around that protein food, and they're more likely to eat less of it because they're also mindful of those public health messages that tell you need to eat less protein and tell you need to avoid certain foods. So I think that they're more likely to experience that.
Well, one thing that we didn't, or that I didn't publish in these case studies, is it was an observation, but because it was an observation that I couldn't really support quantitatively per se, was that a lot of people who are coming to me, whether it be for COVID, long COVID, or other sort of things at the moment, they're also seeking to follow a plant-based diet or moving towards that. Mm-hmm. And, given that we see a lot of those micronutrient insufficiencies we're seeing are fairly abundant in meat, like zinc and preformed vitamin A in particular, things like that, I wonder if that's potentially a factor too. And I think there is from what I've seen, there's a greater prevalence of veganism within women, for example, or the desire to move towards that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of influence in that space. There are a lot of, and good on them, healthy, fit, active vegan influencers, and all power to them. But people need to be aware that when you cut out here's a funny one, right? When you cut out an entire food group, there are potential ramifications from it. Now, I might be a bit at risk here because a lot of people will talk about that with respect solely to like keto or low carb diets. Why are you cutting out whole food groups? But then they won't have the same criticism for people who pursue a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
But if anything, that's going to be more impactful, right? Because there are certain things you just can't get from plant foods.
Yeah. And then when you go low carb, it's not necessarily that that's no carb, and I think that's the other. So you're not pulling out an entire macronutrient. You are reducing down where you get your nutrients from, but you're actually just by default making it a more nutrient dense diet, because the carbs we focus on tend to be we focus on removing tend to be those refined carbohydrates.
Yeah, I think there's a real problem there in that if we assume that, for example, a low-carb diet is less than 50 grams of carbs a day, I can completely buy the idea that it's pretty detrimental to performance. Not for everyone, but, across the board. But if we consider that we might say a low-carb diet or a keto diet, let's say, is less than 10% of calories from carbs, that might be a whole different picture. Because then if you're eating 4,000 calories, then it's 100 grams of carbs. It's double the amount. Yeah. Whether that changes the context enough for people, who knows, who cares? But it certainly is a big difference. And so I think one person's low carb or one person's keto, low carb's a whole different story altogether, obviously, because then it might be that someone's having 200 or more grams of carbs in a day and still be functionally low carb. That does change the conversation a lot. And so what I often say to people who are very avidly anti is not that I'm pro low carb per se, it's that I'm pro the application of it if it works for someone. And one person's low carb is not another person's low carb.
Yeah.
So let's all get along.
Let's all get along. Exactly. And, historically in clinical studies, actually there's a ton of research in women. And if you look across nutrition research, women make up the majority of the populations that are studied in a range of different areas.
I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
Because so often we hear the narrative that women aren't studied. And I agree with that across the board. And we also need to do a better job of studying women. Like I was on a panel in Aussie where a woman from the Australian Dietetic Association said, we don't study women because it's too difficult because they have menstrual cycles and things. And I said straight after that, we were on a panel together, I said, that's not good enough. Like that's a shitty thing to say, and it's a shitty thing to do. But that has happened. But to your point, if we look at nutrition research, so much of it is, especially because a lot of it's based on weight loss, right? So many of the cohorts we see are women with overweight or obesity, women with diabetes or metabolic syndrome. And even in the research that you and I have done, how many of our participants are women? Like it's always skewed female because women want to be involved and find things that work for them.
And I think it's just when you come to the sports nutrition literature where you've got the smaller studies where there's a smaller budget, that's where the research hasn't been done because, quote unquote, it's too hard on the menstrual, with sort of aligning menstrual cycle, even thinking about the menstrual cycle. And a lot of the research that has been done has been like, well, if you're on the oral contraceptive pill, awesome, we'll take you. Otherwise, no. Or they delineate between OCP versus no OCP, not really given much sort of consideration to what phase of the menstrual cycle the other women are on.
So we often all play into the trope, and we use it as sort of marketing material tongue in cheek, that women aren't just small men. And I agree with that, because I think one of the main reasons I agree with that is because women aren't just small men, because women are men are men. But we're all humans, right? And I wanted to ask you about that. Like, what are the... Considering we're all Homo sapiens and we share the identical genetic material, what are the major differences then? And how does that impact the differences in, say, nutrition that women should follow or training that women should follow?
Yeah. Yeah. So if we just think we sort of step back from the athletic population and just think in general, women are, because of the menstrual cycle and the changes in their hormone profile, both within a month or within that sort of, I say month, that's quite a unicorn approach, if you like, to the menstrual cycle, because that might vary from 21 to 35 days. So you get the changes in hormones across a month, yet you also get changes across the life cycle. And, at varying points across that time, women will have different outcomes depending on what you're sort of looking at because of those changes. So sleep is one which is really interesting. So women are much more likely to experience sleep disturbances, both in sort of puberty time, so when they're actually just, developing, so adolescent, coming into adulthood. Also within the luteal phase, it might be that there's this increased histamine response because of estrogen, or there's the sudden drop of progesterone once your menstrual cycle starts at day 0, or post-menopausal, just a change in, again, the loss of progesterone can cause, or the fluctuating estrogen as we head into sort of perimenopause, that can all change that sort of sleep cycle. So I think we can absolutely say that sleep is one lifestyle factor which is impacted on by the different hormone profile between men and women.
Does that explain some? I'm just thinking out loud here. Does that explain some of the variability we see through the cycle in like cravings? Because obviously sleep is the biggest impactor probably in like ad libitum snack craving or sugar craving, things like that.
Yeah, that's such a great question, actually, Cliff. So I think it could be a couple of things. So yes, sleep could be one of those things. So whenever you are sleep deprived, you are slightly more insulin resistant, which actually in the luteal phase, we are slightly more insulin resistant anyway. We can't access glycogen stores as much. And I see that reported as we are slightly more insulin resistant. I don't know to what extent it sort of changes things, but we can't use carbs the same way that we can in the follicular phase, for example. But also in the luteal phase, there are reports of a higher energy expenditure. Now, that might range from 85 kilojoules to, 250 kilojoules. So I don't think
massive amounts.
Exactly, massive amounts. And actually, in fact, there are other studies which show like quite a large, like maybe 250, 300 calories. So maybe change, but that's, again, it's an average, the amounts you see are averages often reported. And it's, for some women, there's no change in energy expenditure. For some, there is a large change. So, but that too can increase in, might explain the increase in cravings because energy needs are greater. So you just want more food.
So is there any truth to that sort of narrative out there that women should train differently or eat differently at different stages of the menstrual cycle?
So if by truth you mean research truth, then I would say currently there is no research to suggest that things need to be changed according to your menstrual cycle.
Right.
On balance. So if you look at the literature, I think what the real problems with the literature is actually that there isn't enough.
Right.
As we said, women in that clinical sort of sports nutrition performance space are understudied. So we can't definitively say one way or the other. The mechanisms are there though, like the mechanisms for which performance might be impacted. So there might be a change in levels of inflammation. There might be a change in ability to recover or our ability to access glycogen for energy. So these things are real. And the psychosomatic or the psychological aspect of having a menstrual cycle for some women might be enough as well to change performance. So thinking that your period's going to impact negatively on your performance could actually change the outcome of your performance as well. So I don't think that we should undervalue that aspect as well. Aside from the literature though, I think any woman that has symptoms in and around her cycle is undoubtedly going to experience differences in performance, actually, because for some women, tender breasts, bloating, back pain, that will change functionally how your body moves, levels of inflammation, weight gain that some women experience, water retention, like that's going to change how a woman sort of is able to complete training and perform. So I think, like, women are not small men, yes, but we are same species, yes. I think everyone is an individual.
Right, yeah. And that's so what I'm getting from you is that there are differences, and they can result in differences in performance outcomes. It might result in differences in the way that someone maybe wants to eat. But there's a lot of individual variability. And so I guess at that point, it comes down to looking at the individual and determining what's best for that individual in that phase of cycle, rather than having blanket recommendations for, you are a woman at this stage, therefore you should eat this way and train this way.
Yes. That is what I think. I mean, there are studies to show that performance might be enhanced for certain, strength and power in and around your follicular phase might be better. Like I see that I see research that might suggest that, small, albeit small studies. Equally, doing long bouts of aerobic activity during your follicular phase might be easier in that earlier part of your menstrual cycle compared to the latter part.
Right.
Because of your ability to access glycogen. However, I think that's another thing that we need to sort of talk about as well, is the sort of carb recommendations for women based on their cycle.
Tell me about it. Because I don't know about this stuff. You're the expert.
Yeah. And actually, all I would say is that you often hear that women need more carbs in the luteal phase because they're not able to access the glycogen stores. So they need to sort of take on board that exogenous carbohydrate. And I guess my thinking is, if you can't access your glycogen as well, then I think that it then pushes the case to become better fat adapted. So you're not just relying on glycogen for performance, because if a woman is experiencing changes in how she feels in her luteal phase, and it results in extra cravings and maybe a bit of bloating or water retention, I don't think having more carbs in that instance is actually going to make her feel better. I think, in fact, if anything, it might just make her feel a bit worse. That's
a great point. One thing that comes to mind is I wonder what the mechanism, or the underlying, not mechanism, but the underlying reason for that insulin resistance is. Because I would assume, based on what we know about other things, it would be an adaptive response to preserve glucose for other necessary requirements, whether that be, particular hormone creation or particular tissue requiring extra fuel. Similar to what we see with low-carb diets, where there's that situation of benevolent pseudo-diabetes, right? Where on a low-carb diet, tissue will become more insulin resistant to preserve greater glucose availability for the central nervous system.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. It's a benign thing that is an adaptive mechanism that has benefits. So, it would be like saying that because there is transient insulin resistance, which resolves like that as soon as someone starts eating carbs again after being on a low-carb diet, because there's that transient insulin resistance, that everyone on a low-carb diet should switch to a high-carb diet. That ignores that there's other outcomes that we could achieve from it.
Yeah, I agree. And I wonder, and this is it that you're preparing your body for pregnancy, after ovulation? Like that's that's going to be the time with which you're either going to get pregnant or not. So I wonder whether there's that, because that is one thing that comes to mind. But estrogen is insulin sensitizing, and that rises to a peak in ovulation and then it drops. So I wonder whether it really is insulin resistance per se, and maybe it isn't. Maybe it's actually just there's slightly less of that sort of insulin sensitizing estrogen around.
Right, yeah. So just a natural consequence of cycle, maybe.
Yeah. I wonder whether that's it. But it's hard to make blanket recommendations on any nutrition front, isn't it? So I don't, that's not different for women, actually. Like, if there are certainly things which help resolve some of those premenstrual symptoms that women experience, much like there is definitely some key strategies for a woman in perimenopause to make her feel better, and so women in that space. But I think it's very difficult it's like the dietary guidelines. You can't just say, these are the 5 things that are going to help everyone. So, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And so I guess a lot of the common tropes that are around that are really to do with, I think, treating women as if their hormonal balance is some sort of precious glass thing that can be shattered, so easily. A lot of these tropes that are around, like women shouldn't do high intensity interval training, they shouldn't fast, they shouldn't follow a low carb diet. From our previous discussions, I would gather that that's probably not, it's not accurate because it's not applicable to all women or even most women. It just depends on the instance, right?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, like when I was writing the course for the female athlete nutrition module and just the female nutrition module, what are the, in the literature, it does say that women have higher morning cortisol, for example, compared to men. And I think that's where the recommendation comes for women should not fast and should not do high intensity training fasted, particularly because that's just going to spike cortisol even higher. However, I also spoke to Dr. Carrie Jones on a previous episode of Mikkipedia, and she is or was the medical director at Dutch. So Dutch is the company that do the urine analysis of cortisol levels, which are much more representative of cortisol patterns and actual cortisol, because it's the metabolized cortisol in the urine and not the 3% you might find in the bloodstream. And she said she's seen thousands and thousands of samples and has never seen a difference between men and women in terms of their cortisol in the morning. So again, what is this evidence-based, quote unquote evidence-based sort of premise that women have higher cortisol? Well, actually, clinically speaking, that's not what we see. Might have been what we saw in those small studies that are now relied upon to sort of underpin some of the recommendations you hear, but it's not what people see in practice a lot of the time.
And I guess even if there is a slightly higher level of morning waking cortisol, if that were consistent across women, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, because what's important is the change that's elicited, right? So if you have something that results in consistent higher cortisol, that would potentially be problematic. But with fasting, for example, and I'm not advocating that women fast. I'm not advocating that women are on a low-carb diet. What I'm advocating is that people choose a diet that's most appropriate for their health. But in the research we have on fasting, for example, we see that, yes, there are increases in cortisol and other stress hormones, but they typically that's typically a transient change that resolves within about 2 weeks. So once people are adapted to fasting, there's no impact on stress hormones. So from my point of view, it's about horses for courses, right? Because we also see in the research, we see really good results from fasting and low carb for women. But we need to look at what those studies are and what they were what their design was, what they were looking at. And they're typically studies on women with obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, who, have large amounts of body fat typically. And so fasting and or low carb is going to help them to correct an appropriate energy balance. So in those cases, why wouldn't it be effective? However, I completely get, and I've obviously advocated for this as you have, that where people are under fuel, as a lot are, maybe fasting and low carb are inappropriate because they're potentially going to drive that auto-regulation of energy down, and in some cases way down. So it's going to further exacerbate that problem of underfueling.
Yeah, and that's really my premise for a lot of what I say on social media, and that is that it's that it's not fasting per se that's the issue. It's the inappropriate use of fasting or the inability to refuel after the fast that really sort of does people, not just women, but people in when it comes to fasting or low carb and that kind of thing.
Well, it's the magic, right?
Yes.
Fasting and low carb are magic. They do all these amazing things. And it's like, no, they actually don't. Really, like anything else, they help people to auto-regulate energy. Yeah. Because if you look at all markers across the board for fasting, for example, and I've looked into this a lot, read basically every study that's been done. If we look at fasting and we look at all measures, all outcomes, when the energy intake is the same, there's basically no difference at all except for one marker potentially. There's probably lower IGF-1 from fasting.
Right.
Outside of that, everything's the same.
And with that, is it meaningfully lower or just significant?
A good question. I'm not sure. I know that it's significant. I'm not sure whether it's highly meaningful, but it's of interest at least for, say, cancer treatment. That's the only thing I can really think of which we would even worry about, moderate changes in IGF-1.
Yeah.
And maybe for some things, like optimizing muscle gain, you might say, well, it's the other way. You probably don't want a reduction in IGF-1.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. And, if we come back to important points for people to consider when it comes to just, how females might differ from males and in that sort of performance space and things like that. Obviously, we have, quote unquote, a report card. Every month you get your menstrual cycle if you're cycling naturally, because obviously on an oral contraceptive pill you don't have a period. Then that's a pretty good first indicator that things might be going awry with what you're doing from a nutrition standpoint.
Right.
But it's not the only one, because there are plenty of examples of women who every 28 days have a robust menstrual cycle, yet are underfueling, have mood issues, sleep issues, are not able to recover. And there are other signs of the sort of relative energy deficiency, which actually don't impact their menstrual cycle either. So I think there is wide variation into how robust a woman's menstrual, sort of those hormone signals are as well.
And you mentioned relative energy deficiency. So we're talking there about that idea of underfueling, and it's characterized as RED-S, or that relative energy deficiency syndrome. Is it correct that there's a greater prevalence of that in women?
Yes, it is correct. There's a greater prevalence. And I think the threshold might be a little bit higher as well.
Right.
As far as we know. So for example, there are numbers sort of thrown out there that anything under 30 calories per kilogram of lean body mass would be considered low energy availability. And I believe that's where the literature is on that, in that realm. And with men, it's actually might be 20 calories per kg of lean body mass. I might be a little bit out by 5 calories on the men one. But what I would say is that some of the experts have sort of critiqued the literature around energy availability and said, you know what, these numbers are a good start, but they shouldn't be gospel, because again, everyone is different. And I think that's the same with any concept, any sort of parameter of nutrition. Very few things are gospel, I think. I think that individual variation will always play a part in how meaningful they are to the individual.
Oh, no doubt. Absolutely. And I think that's one thing that really comes across, I think, in your course, is that it's the things I love about your course is that it's based consummately on the research, but it's pragmatically looking at how that applies to individuals. So it's not, making these blanket statements. It's not pulling, things out of nowhere, or inappropriately applying the science. Because, one of the things that's really annoyed me in the past is that studies are referenced to support ideas, but if you actually read the study, it doesn't support that idea. And so I think we need to be very careful about what we're looking at and recognize that, hey, there's a lot of individual variability. And also that there are some very important factors that affect people, full stop, but, probably do affect women with a far greater prevalence, like that idea of underfueling, undernourishment. And so we really need to be aware of that and make sure that, because you and I will both see people all the time who come in eating 900, 1100, 1200 calories a day. And I would say for most, with the odd exception, for most people, that's just drastically low.
It is. And interesting, actually, because Julian and I had this conversation too, but then you see people on social media saying it's never appropriate to eat 1200 calories. And
of course it is.
For the majority, yeah. So again, it's that appreciation for nuance. And what I will say from a female perspective is that the older you get, you don't have to like this is another narrative I see, is that if you're in perimenopause or menopause, you absolutely must not be low carb. Actually, as you head into perimenopause and menopause, we are more insulin resistant. We are at greater risk of dementia and subsequent sort of cognitive decline, and Alzheimer's cognitive decline isn't actually subsequent to dementia. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in part, we fare better on a lower carb approach.
Yeah.
Because of that. And this is true, I think, of athletes as well. I don't think it's just the sedentary or the general population that would benefit from that. Because I see, female athletes, menopause, you shouldn't be low carb, and I just don't know that that's true.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that, again, we need to go back to what are we actually talking about? Like, what is that relative to what you're doing? People could look at me and say, well, you're an athlete, you should be high carb. But the thing is, I don't actually expend that much energy. Yeah. I lift some heavy things, most days. And I wrestle with other men 2 or 3 times a week. But overall, my expenditure is not that high. And if I were having 8 grams per kilo of carbs, I would just get fat.
Yeah. And actually, I've seen more recently recommendations for women to be up on sort of 7 to 8 grams of carbs per kg body weight per day. And I think for a lot of women, that is a significant amount of carbohydrate to be eating, with the ability to get other nutrients in. So it's because it's always opportunity costs, I think.
I've never understood gram per kilo recommendations with respect to carbohydrate, because I've always thought that, you've known my approach that I've had since the late 90s, is that you optimize protein based on grams per kilo and then provide a threshold of fat appropriate to the person. And usually I would prescribe no less than, say, 25% calories from fat. But then the rest surely can be made up from carbohydrate. And that kind of takes care of the problem, because then if you feel that the person would benefit from a higher carb diet, then 25% calories coming from fat, maybe, 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo body weight, and then the rest carbohydrate. If they're exercising a lot, there's going to be more carbs. If they're not exercising so much, their relative calorie requirement's going to be lower, and therefore they'll be eating fewer carbohydrates. If they have metabolic disorder and it's appropriate for them psychosocially, well, then maybe they benefit from a more moderate or lower carb approach. It is really courses for courses, and I don't see that differing too much between men and women, except for a couple of instances like during conception or pregnancy, where I do think that women do benefit from skewing towards moderate to higher carb, and, obviously higher energy intakes, just to make sure that they're energy replete.
Yeah, no, I agree. I find it interesting as well.
It's fascinating stuff. And so you have your women's health and performance courses now, both available at HPI.
Yes.
So who are those courses mostly geared towards, Mick? Are they for practitioners, athletes, general population, or all of the above?
Yeah, do you know what? I wonder if you agree with me, but I feel like they're pitched actually to suit a larger audience. Like I tend to add science in and add explanatory notes, I think it's helpful for an athlete or an interested sort of female individual to understand, if she's interested in knowing a bit more about how things change across the life cycle, or how where the science is at with regards to the performance perspective, then I think that anyone can really go in and get a lot from the course. I do think from a clinician perspective, I do add some clinician notes as well in the workbooks and have a few tips, which, hey, look, clinicians may be super all over this stuff anyway, but if it is new to you, and particularly in that performance realm, then I think that they could also benefit from doing the course. And a lot of people who have done it have reached out to say that they really got a lot from it, which was great.
Yeah, our feedback across the board has been fantastic. And I think that's because what people are often missing is a synthesis of those various disparate ideas out there, but a synthesis of those based on the evidence, but then with that practical translation. And I think, one of the things that I think you do better than most people in the industry is translating those concepts into what people can actually do. And so that's where I think a lot of people are missing. And because there's that translation there, I think it works really well for general people just wanting to be healthier, athletes or practitioners. I think people can get a huge amount out of it.
Yeah, awesome. Sweet, Cliff.
Thanks, Mikki.
Wow, that was great. So we kicked off with David Duchovny, and
we ended
with Mikki Williden.
And that's, hey, what a great pairing.
I know.
Hope Baz isn't too
I would have thought so back in 1994 when I got my Beefy T-shirt printed with a picture of Mulder and Scully on the front. I had this for 10 years, 15 years, and then I had written on the back, "The truth is out there." Oh my God. I just loved it so much.
You were so cool, Mikki.
I was so cool. And in fact, I knew I wasn't very cool and I didn't care. I'm like, no, I love this man and this show so much. I'm here for it. Yeah. Anyway, Clifford, now where can we find these courses?
These courses can be found at the Holistic Performance Institute, which is holisticperformance.institute.
Perfect. And also, just to remind people who are listening to this on Mikkipedia, you mentioned a case study that you'd just published. Where can we find your writing? Is it at the same place or is it on your personal website?
So that particular case study has been published at our Institute journal. So that's the Journal of Holistic Performance, which you can find going from the Holistic Performance Institute link, or you can find it directly at holisticperformance.org.
Great, Cliff. Well, hey, thanks so much for chatting to me.
Thanks for chatting with me, Mikki.
And
I love doing the Swapcast.
I know, I love it too. It's so good. Boom, in the bag. See you later.
Thanks, Mick.
Alrighty, always a wealth of information, always so great to chat to Cliff. I just absolutely love it, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Next week on the podcast, I speak to Nicole Jardim from The Period Party, and we talk again about women's health, about what to expect with your menstrual cycle, and a whole host of other things, so look out for that one. Until then though, you can catch me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, over on Twitter and Instagram at Mikki Williden, or jump on my website, mikkiwilliden.com, pick yourself up a protein ebook, book a consult one-on-one with me, or sign up to any number of my meal plans, where in addition to my weekly email, you get access to me 24/7, access to member-only Facebook Lives, and you also get the opportunity to pick my brain on anything nutrition related, in addition to over 900 recipes that are frequently updated, and if you purchase a meal plan option, a 28-day meal plan to help you meet your nutrition-related goals. All right, team, you have a fab week, and we'll speak soon. See you later.